This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and today, because we're doing the garden Q&A for September, I'm joined by Josie Lewis, our head gardener. Welcome, Josie.
Hello.
So we've been sent in various questions for September, and I'm going to start with the first one, which is, when is the time to mulch dahlias? So we're in September. I mean, I know in the north, frosts aren't that far away if you live at a higher altitude too, but we actually don't tend to cut down and mulch our dahlias until the end of November, even into December. The person who wrote in with the question said they've always lifted them, but they're thinking this year they might try leaving them in. Honestly, both Josie and I would passionately urge you to leave them in. But you have to mulch them really deeply. And what I mean by deeply is upturning a whole bucket of mulch. What do you use? Well, you could use fine bark chippings, or we use our own compost, or you could use green waste, pretty much anything. But the point is, it's like putting extra togs of your duvet on as it gets cold in the winter. They need to be protected from the frost. And so as soon as the tops are blackened, cut the stems back to about sort of 10 centimetres from the ground, put a whacking great label so you know which is which, and it doesn't get buried completely by the compost, and then mulch over the head of each one. And yeah, so we do it. It tends to be here kind of late November, early December.
Just an addition to that, if you're turfing out your summer containers, use the mulch in the containers.
Oh, yes. And good point. That reminds me of something else, which is you cannot leave your dahlias in pots. They are the only ones that we always lift here. We take them out of their pots, in go the tulips or whatever, but they are too vulnerable to frost, with frost being able to get at the edge, the sides of the pot, as well as the top and even the bottom. And so we do actually remove our dahlias from pots, but we don't from our borders. So just to extend out from that question about mulching and the timing of mulching of your dahlias. Okay, great. What's your question, Josie?
My question is, how do we decide what to cut back and what not to cut back as we go into autumn? I don't know if this is referring particularly to perennials or shrubs, so I'll quickly cover both. So don't cut back your hydrangeas. If you're picking the flower heads for drying, that's absolutely fine. But leave most of the plant intact. The point of this is so it protects the base of the plant. So all that top, if you've got all that top growth still on it, then that, it'll have a little microclimate, which just helps a little bit to protect the root. And buddleias we also leave until spring, but we will take off the top third, because if your buddleias are really tall, if they're 2 or 3 meters, then we'd take off the top third because they can be really battered by the wind. And once you start, the whole shrub starts rocking about, then you get that collar forming in the soil, and that fills with water, and that will rot off the plant, so that you want to avoid that. And, the same thing happens with roses. You get that collar of, I don't know how you describe it really, but it's sort of compacted soil as the plant rocks. And that really fills with water.
Wind rock.
Yes, yeah. Then I was going to move on to perennials. Yes, if they're all sort of battered, take them down. We leave anything here that's got winter interest, so lovely seed heads or grasses we leave over the winter. But we're also thinking this is providing homes for wildlife, so think of it not just for your aesthetics, but you're providing a home for little insects to hide over winter in. So, anything that's not really battered, we'll leave standing.
And I just wanted to add in there, with tender perennials, we've had a really kind of revolutionary discovery here, I think, which is, to be honest, out of slight neglect, if we're totally honest.
What are you saying?
We had a whole hedge of attar of roses, scented leaf pelargonium, and one year we just didn't get round to lifting them and bringing them in, and then there was a earlier frost than we expected. But not only had we not lifted and brought them in, but we hadn't cut them back at all, so they had really quite generous tops. And come April, we just couldn't believe it, because we'd actually just left them in and we were going to take them out and put some dahlias to line this particular path. But just as we were thinking, okay, it's time now to take out the pelargonium and put in the dahlia, thinking the pelargonium was dead as a dodo, lo and behold, they weren't dead at all. They were beginning to shoot from the base. And that is because we had left the tops on the scented leaf pelargonium, which I know you mentioned earlier, but it's just so important to stress that. And we have found now with an awful lot of the tender perennial salvias like Nacht Linda and Sarah Josie and the scented leaf pelargoniums, or, Quercifolius is another classic one that we've now perennialized here. And it's obviously not in a really harsh beast from the east sort of winter that we had 4 or 5 years ago, but in a milder winter like we just had in 23, 24, we find that they come back fine if you leave the tops on, because it provides a sort of almost like a cloche, but of their own leaves over the crown of the plant. So it's really, really worth doing.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so my next question was, I want to make sure I have a house full of scented force bulbs inside for Christmas this year. When should I start to do this? Okay, well, we do a rotation here because I also absolutely love this. I find life without things growing in the garden quite a strain. I really love growth and flowers and scents. And so I make sure I have as many as I possibly can. And so we start planting Narcissus paper whites really pretty early. So certainly October, and it tends to be about 6 weeks of forcing with those. So they're really, really quick. And so you can definitely have them for Christmas. We actually start even earlier with hyacinths. And if you want to force hyacinths yourself, you need to buy them in August and then put them in the fridge, in the salad drawer, in a bag, in the bottom of the fridge for 3 to 4 weeks. And that is effectively forcing them. But you can buy them forced. They're a bit more expensive, but you can buy them forced when that's been done for you. But I would aim to start planting your hyacinths by middle to end of September if you want them for Christmas. So we tend to do Narcissus, like paper whites, Cragford's another lovely early one, and Avalanche. And then hyacinths, the blue, like Peter Stuyvesant, have the strongest scent of all. But I particularly like the whites at Christmas, and I love Woodstock, which is the beetroot purple variety. And then I think it's really nice to have things like Iris reticulatas, which we grow lots of here, and they are quite easy to force also for Christmas. They need planting in September, early October. And there are lots of other things like grape hyacinths, but in my experience, they tend to come in the new year. They're a little bit more difficult to force early. But so basically, September is a really good time to get going. And the first things you want to start with really are your hyacinths. And they need cold and dark to get their roots to start to grow without the strain of the flower sprout starting, which then, both in terms of plant bulb health, but also in terms of literally engineering, if you don't have the cold and the dark, you then get a top-heavy bulb that just tips over. So it really makes a difference to do the proper forcing and the dark, which will help the roots get down before the shoots are drawn out in the light, even if they're cold. Okay. Great. Over to you, Josie.
Okay. The next question is about bulbs as well. Is it too soon to start planting bulbs, and what to plant when and how to store them if it is too soon? So in September, if you're turfing out your bulbs that you've left in a pot over the summer, you'll see in September that they've got really quite good roots starting to grow. So that'll give an indication that, yes, you can plant them in September. So I would get going with things like Narcissi in September. They're quite happy. So you can get them out of the way and get them done. And then tulips. It was always recommended that you wait until the frosts and then start planting. But, our climate is changing so much. You could be waiting until January to plant. So it's quite difficult now. So we start planting our tulips in, say, mid-October, because we have so many to put in. and we just have to get on with it. Really, it's not ideal. It's better for them for the ground to have had frost on it to kill off any spores or anything. But it's just not happening, so we can't stick to that and advise that nowadays. So, but if you're planting into new compost, if you're planting in pots into new compost, then there should be no spores present in the compost, and so plant when you think of it. So I would start tulips and all other bulbs, irises. From October onwards, we tend to plant. But if you still find them hanging about in the garage at Christmas, then still plant them. They'll still come up. So long as they're not really mouldy or soggy or soft, then they will make an effort and they will flower. So yeah, always worth giving them a go. And if you haven't got time to plant them straight away, then put them in net bags. Don't store them in plastic bags. Store them in net bags, somewhere cool and airy, and hopefully they'll keep until you're ready to plant them. But, go get on with it rather than leaving it, would be my advice.
Very good. Okay, well, so those are our main jobs for September that we're getting on with. And thanks, Josie, for helping me with those.
Pleasure.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, I'd really love it if you reviewed, rated and subscribed on wherever you listen to your podcasts. It'll help new listeners to know that we're here and enable us to keep getting the very best and most interesting guests week after week.